Now that we're into the hottest months of the year, I'm reaching for clothes that are breathable, easy to style, and built to last. But I've stopped wasting money on fast fashion that barely survives the season. And that's why I'm so glad I found Quince. Quince makes it easy to upgrade your summer wardrobe with timeless staples that feel luxurious without the luxury markup. I've been living in their 100% European linen shorts and flowy dresses starting at just $30. And I picked up a pair of their Italian leather platform sandals that look and feel just like designer brands, but at a fraction of the price. Quince creates timeless, high-quality pieces, and they cut out the middleman, which means less waste and more value. Their clothes aren't just trendy, they're enduring, and they work only with ethical factories that prioritize both people and the planet. It just makes sense. Fewer, better things. Pieces I'll wear for years. I use Quince, and I know you'll love it too. Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/bestofyou for free shipping and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/bestofyou. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. One of the most important things I've learned in this stage of life is that tending to your inner world isn't optional. It's essential. When we're managing so many roles and transitions, having someone to walk with you, ask good questions, and help you make sense of what you're feeling is a gift. BetterHelp makes that support accessible through online therapy with licensed professionals. Whether you're working through a specific challenge or simply want a space to grow, BetterHelp can help guide you through that process with care and consistency. It's so easy to get started. After a brief questionnaire, you'll be matched with a therapist who fits your needs. And because it's online, you can attend sessions in a way that works for your life, at home, during a break, or from wherever you're most at ease. If you're curious about how therapy could support you in this season, give BetterHelp a try. Visit betterhelp.com/bestofyou to begin your journey. That's betterhelp.com/bestofyou. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of The Best of You. Today's conversation is tender, it's courageous, and I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to share it with you. I'm joined by Stephanie Duncan Smith. Stephanie is the author of a stunning new book. It's called Even After Everything: The Spiritual Practice of Knowing the Risks and Loving Anyway. Stephanie is someone I deeply respect for her honesty, her depth, and her spiritual insight. As a senior editor at Harper One, she has shaped the words of many best-selling and award-winning authors that you and I know and love. But today, she's sharing her own story. In our conversation, Stephanie opens up about her own experience of pregnancy loss and the spiritual and emotional disorientation that followed. We talk about what it means to hold both deep grief and fierce love, and to take the risk of opening your heart again even after it's been broken. In today's episode, we get really personal. We talk honestly about pain, about healing, and the slow, sacred work of learning to trust again. We talk about how it's not through grit or forced resilience that we find our way forward, but through receiving the full spectrum of our lives, of what's achingly hard and what's achingly beautiful, and knowing that at the heart of both lives the promise of God with us. I want to gently acknowledge that today's episode includes themes of pregnancy loss and miscarriage, which may be difficult for some listeners. Please take care of yourself, and as always, feel free to skip this episode if it's not the right time for you. Stephanie Duncan Smith is a writer and senior editor at Harper One, who has spent her career developing award-winning and best-selling authors. She is the creator of Slant Letter, a best-selling Substack email newsletter for writers looking to deepen their craft. Stephanie lives with her husband, Zach, a professor, and their 2 children in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Please enjoy my conversation with Stephanie Duncan Smith. I kind of want to start this conversation where your memoir starts, which is with this incredible tension where you experience the loss of your first pregnancy right as Christmas was approaching. And that begins to serve as an anchor for the structure of the rest of your book, but tell us a little bit about the background and about that moment.
So I should start by saying my husband and I were childless by choice for almost 10 years before we decided that we were going to try for a pregnancy. And this was a storied decision. And we didn't come into it with a lot. It was more of a cognitive choice, if I'm being very honest, than an emotional one. We knew that we wanted a family, but we felt pretty ambivalent for a while about the when and wheres of that. And so it was really meaningful to me that December to grow into the idea, even just the very fresh concept that I was pregnant, and for that experience to parallel the Advent season. Because this is what's important. I didn't go into this pregnancy with high hopes, frankly. I went into it thinking, I think this is what we want, I guess. So it was really meaningful to me to walk through this Advent season and really for the first time experience firsthand the wonder and the mystery of new life. That wasn't something that I carried with me into the process until it became part of my embodied experience. And then I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then that parallel very suddenly, starkly broke. And it was the week before Christmas. And in the Advent season, each week is sort of themed. And that week was Advent's week of joy. And it felt like a slap in the face. It felt like divine abandonment. And it felt like the whole world in across cultures and generations and traditions, so many people were readying to celebrate this most historic birth. And then it was like just kidding, not for you. And it broke me. It just broke me. It would have been painful any time of year, but the juxtaposition really felt searing in a way that sent me reeling.
It makes so much sense. And one of the really incredible and meaningful parts of the book is you talk about how you began to lean into this liturgical calendar, this idea of the seasons. And we're going to get into what we mean by that for my listeners who aren't as familiar with that type of background, but as sort of a structure or a scaffolding for that process of grief and pain, right? So the very thing that in a way was such a added, this coming of Christmas kind of compounded in many ways the sense of loss also became something that you began to lean into. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how that kind of played itself out inside of you?
Absolutely. So I gave you my raw reactions in the real time of this event. And what I had to work through and work out for myself was how does a story, the liturgical story, the narrative and the shape of the Christian year, which follows the life and death and resurrection of Christ, square with an experience like that? And how does the story of what I understand primarily to be the incarnation, God with us, the coming of God to be in our humanity. How do we square that with personal moments that truly feel like and are marked by death? What are you supposed to do with that juxtaposition? I mean, the book shows my wrangling and reckoning through this, so I don't come by any of what I'm about to say lightly. But I think for me, a lot of it was realizing that there's a promise in the paradox, and it is God is with us, and that presence follows us through any personal moment of our life, death, and life that defies death. That is the constant. And the whole beauty and consolation of Advent is that a world is hurting so deeply that God says, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to come be with you. And not just be with you, but in the depths of the worst of your human experiences, I am there. So what I experienced at first, and this is valid, this is an unsolvable paradox. And I actually came to see it's not.
So I want to slow down there on the unsolvable paradox. Tell me more what you mean by that.
I think we approach Christmas as a universal story, a universal hope, a universal promise. And that is a part of the Christian year, right? So, in broad terms, the Christian year begins in Advent, which is a preparatory season toward the celebration and the feast day of Christmas. These are the major seasons. And then time goes on and it moves from Lent, which is a preparatory season for the feast day of Easter. And there's other seasons in there, but all of these are sort of high holidays, right? And in the calendar of a year, each of us will have particular personal experiences and life events that might align with those larger narratives, or they might clash in unbearable ways. And when that happens, as it did for me, it's so painful. And that dissonance can feel unbearable and unsolvable. And that was really the driver in my writing this book and working it out for myself, thinking, okay, but where is God in this dissonance as I'm feeling it? Because this doesn't feel like something where you can solve for X.
So, in the process of wrestling with that very tension of when this tragedy in your life occurred, which was right at Christmas, it kind of forced you into dealing with tremendous dissonance. This doesn't compute. How can this incredibly painful loss be occurring at the very moment that much of the world is celebrating this incredible hope?
Yes, and I think that is the core of the question. It's how can anything be so beautiful and representative of hope for so many other people, but to me, it's salt in the wound.
Yes. Oh, that I'm imagining so many listeners resonating with that on a lot of different levels. When something so incredibly painful happens on a day, on an anniversary, in a moment, and suddenly that very beautiful thing becomes something incredibly painful. And that was sort of the impetus for you to have to almost begin not only to process, and so I want to kind of break this apart, not only to process the loss, but also to process it against your larger spiritual framework. It's almost like you didn't have a choice in that because of that juxtaposition, right?
Yes. So authenticity is a guiding compass for me. I do not have a poker face. I can't fake it. And this was the first year, I think, in my life that I did not go to the Christmas Eve service because I knew that that would not be good for me. And I couldn't put on a face and pretend that the ultimate had not just happened when it had. And I think, for anyone in any kind of grief, I often say the loss or the hardship is the first grief and the pretense is the second. And there's not much you can do to control the loss or the hardship itself. That's what has happened has happened. We can't undo it, but we don't have to put on a pretense. And we don't have to put on ourselves the burden of pretending that things are fine to make other people feel more comfortable. And that's one simple, but I think really profound way to really own your own grieving and healing process. And for me, in the spirit of authenticity, that really began with I have to call this what it is. And I have a chapter in the book called Naming the Night, because I think that's the call when the unthinkable happens, when we brush up onto, you know, pain and death. You just have to call it what it is. And you're allowed to do that. And I think that there's a lot of shoulds that get charged into the grief experience, especially when it comes to pregnancy loss, I've heard so many women say, like, I don't know, should I really be feeling this sad? It was so early, or kind of dismissing and discounting what's an authentic emotion. And I just don't believe that's helpful. And I'm sure you could talk a lot about this from your work. I think there is freedom and a sort of cathartic release in naming the night when it's night.
Yes, yes. And again, the courage for all of us to do that. And I am imagining, putting myself in your shoes, I'm thinking about those weeks leading up to Christmas and after Christmas, the courage to do that during a season when you're especially not supposed to be doing that.
Yeah. The hardest thing for me that year was coming back to work on the other side of the holidays. And everybody's like, how was your Christmas? And I just didn't have the energy. And actually, everybody gets to make their own decisions for themselves. What's good for you in a place of grief, what will be supportive for you. You get to decide that. And that's not anything that I can tell you or anybody else. But actually, for me, again, in the spirit of authenticity, I told a lot more people than I socially needed to because it felt easier for me than not. And that's a choice that I made for me. But I think we all have to decide what's going to help us.
But again, I love that you gave yourself permission because you knew yourself and you knew it is going to hurt more to pretend. Therefore, I'm going to tell people. And that is what I'm doing for me, which is really what's key there. It wasn't, I'm not doing this to make other people feel a certain way. I'm doing this because this is what I need to be able to navigate this. I need to be able to say whatever the truth was. It's so powerful and so important. Anything else from those couple of weeks after when you said that, when you said, I had to go back to work, that was helpful to you in terms of honoring the grief and in terms of what you're saying, not having to pretend and giving yourself permission to be in the emotional space that you were in while also simultaneously still trying to find ways to function in the world. It's something I hear about a lot from clients. It's like, I am feeling this heavy thing and I'm expected to show up at, my job or show up at this event. And how do I do that authentically, to your point, where I'm still doing the thing I need to do, but I'm not betraying this tremendous burden that I'm carrying? Any other thoughts from your own experience? And I know some of that's trial and error. It's figuring ourselves out through the fact of being thrown into something. But any ideas on what was helpful to you or maybe what wasn't helpful?
Yeah, sure. So I haven't told this story often, but this is a good place to share. I ended up not writing this into the book for various editorial reasons, but there's sort of an extra chapter to the events of things. And I went into the ER and was told we couldn't find the heartbeat. But they also said, come back a week later just to be sure. And I watched movies for a week. I didn't have anything else to do. It was a long week. And at the end of that week, I had to go back in and they confirmed it. But in the middle of that week, I was actually summoned to jury duty. And that's a medical reason to not have to go. So I should have been excused. And there's a story here that essentially my provider did not provide a letter in the time that I needed it. So I had to go federally.
Oh my gosh.
And I was furious, but it's the fury that comes with helplessness and powerlessness and just the loss of control. And I was pretty certain I knew what was happening in my body at the time. But it was the one time I left my house that week. And when I was there, I was a mess. And it's an even bigger story because it was actually a criminal trial for murder. And I just couldn't take all the emotional inputs. I just couldn't do it. So after I was finally excused from the selection process, I went to my car and I called. I was too angry to drive. I didn't feel sober in my rage. I didn't trust myself to drive. So I called my provider and I said, I need to speak to the manager. Like, who do I talk to? And they, put me through to some voicemail. And I just thought, I have to do what I can do here. And I'm able to sort of, see the humor of this in retrospect, but I'm not laughing at myself. I actually, after that, made a series of calls. And it was like to the airline that had sent me on a 9-hour delay and needed to give me a voucher. And it was stuff like that. And it's kind of funny that I did that, but I get it. And I see that woman in her car, and I have so much love for her and compassion because she was wailing. And there was so much she couldn't control, and she was doing what she could. And I actually am so proud of her for practicing self-advocacy as a channel for her rage.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't heal me, but it was a lifeline where otherwise I just would have felt like I'm so helpless and powerless. All of this is outside the realm of my control. And I think that matters. I really think that it matters to say in small and large ways to self-advocate, especially when so much feels overwhelming to you. And whether that's saying to your boss, I'm overloaded right now and I can't take on that extra project. Or it's, saying to your mom or your mother-in-law, like, I would love to see you, but I don't have the capacity this weekend. Do what you need to for yourself. And that will feel empowering in a way that is hard to come by in those moments.
I recently read that cooler sleeping temperatures help your body release melatonin more easily, helping you fall asleep faster and sleep more soundly. That stuck with me because, especially during these warmer months, quality rest makes all the difference. I've been sleeping on Cozy Earth's Viscose from Bamboo sheets, and let me tell you, they truly help me feel cooler at night. They wick away heat and moisture in a way that keeps me from tossing and turning. I wish I'd had them during those sleepless, humid summers of the past. Whether you're experiencing night sweats like so many of us do during menopause or just want to sleep more peacefully through the heat, Cozy Earth sheets help you stay cool, calm, and rested. You can try them completely risk-free with their 100-night sleep trial, and every bedding item is backed by a 10-year warranty. Upgrade your summer. Visit CozyEarth.com and use code BESTOFYOU to get 40% off temperature-regulating sheets, apparel, and more. Sleep cooler, lounge lighter, stay cozy with Cozy Earth. If you've been here a while, you know how much I care about rest. Not just sleep, but true, deep restoration. That's why I love our Birch mattress. It's not only incredibly comfortable, but it's made with organic, non-toxic materials that help me sleep easy. Birch mattresses are crafted with natural latex, organic cotton, and ethically sourced wool, so they're breathable, hypoallergenic, and free from harmful off-gassing. I love knowing I'm not only getting the deep rest I need, but it's on something that's safe for me and my family and kind to the planet too. Shipping is fast and free, setup is so simple, and you get a 100-night risk-free trial to make sure it's right for you. Plus, Birch backs every mattress with a 25-year warranty. I want all my listeners to enjoy a deep, restful night's sleep with a new mattress from Birch. Go to birchliving.com/bestofyou for 27% off site-wide, exclusive for listeners of The Best of You. That's birchliving.com/bestofyou and get 27% off site-wide. birchliving.com/bestofyou. That's really good. I just recently did an episode on boundaries where I'd really kind of taken a deep dive into the newest research on it. And one of the studies I found was talking about how, and it kind of gets at this idea of agency and self-advocacy that you're describing, that when we really speak up for ourselves, it actually lights up the prefrontal cortex, which is giving yourself that gift of agency of here's what I can. And again, there might be days where you're like, I cannot do this, and that's okay too. But where there's that moment of I've got to find a healthy outlet for this rage. I'm going to do it. And what a great way to do it. Just really honoring the different parts of you that needed you to understand how real that, I'm angry, I'm sad, all the different things, giving yourself an outlet for those different experiences.
Yes. And I want to close that story too by saying I did get a hold of the founders of the practice and prompted them to institute a policy that for anybody who needs a letter, 24 hours.
That's
And that
amazing.
felt great because I
Yes.
don't want anyone to have to be in that position ever again. I should be the last one.
It reminds me, you talk at the end of the book about the stress cycle. I think it's Emily Nagoski. You were talking about it almost with the stress of allowing yourself to feel joy again, and we're going to get there. But it also is another version of it. I am raging, and I need to find a way to let it flow through.
Yes. Get it out of your body.
Yes.
Whatever you can do to get it out of your body. It's not meant to stay locked up in there. Yep.
I want to just touch on this idea of grief that you described. You write of a pregnancy loss. It's not just the loss in the moment, it's the loss of the future, the loss of all the future possibilities that in your case, you'd barely just started to dream about in a way. It resonated with me. And I want to name this also for listeners because there's so many ways we experience this. I didn't have biological children. And when it became clear to me that I wouldn't or couldn't, it was like I had a parade of images of sixth grade graduations, high school graduations, the future losses. And it surprised me. It just the way my psyche just had to process those losses. So tell me a little bit about how that was for you and what that was like for you.
Yeah. I think this harkens back to what you were saying about finding our permission to grieve. And I'll speak particular to pregnancy loss and then more broadly, because I think this is a really interesting dynamic. But in the case of pregnancy loss, it would be fairly easy on a face value way for someone to say, oh, but you didn't even know them. How can you grieve someone that you don't even know? And it's like, oh, no, that's not what's happening here. You're grieving an entire imagined future and the future of a life together. And I would say that that is sacred imagination at work. That is the mind imagining something good and true and beautiful that God honors and celebrates, whether it comes to being or not. So, who are we to dismiss that sacred imagination? And I think that carries to any kind of loss of the future. And if an example we could all pull up from this is from the COVID years. How many weddings or family reunions or graduations did families and individuals imagine that never got to be? That is worthy of your grief. And again, these are good and beautiful things. And we're right to put our hope in them and be shaped by that hope. The subtitle of my book is The Spiritual Practice of Knowing the Risks and Loving Anyway. And I have been very formed through, living this story and then writing about it in my very strong belief that the risk is always with us. And there could be an argument that it's better not to take that risk. But I am convinced that we really like who we become and we're proud of who we become when we use that sacred imagination for hoping for something good, no matter what.
I love that phrase, that sacred imagination, because there is something holy about it. It tells us something about ourselves, about what we need as humans. These milestones matter, and there's something about them that we need to honor. I really love that. You write, Stephanie, kind of as we lean into, because it is true that part of the book isn't just about the grief, it's about how you began to hope again and in a very specific way, which is relevant in this case. And there's this quote you have in the book that I think is so powerful. You say, the line between love and loss is thin as the rim of a coin and as if tossed into the air, ever shimmering. And, that's the reality, right? And how am I going to hope again? And how am I going to dare to imagine loving again in this specific way. And again, like you said, in broader ways that relate to everybody. This can happen in any kind of situation. And as you were wrestling daily with loving anyway, how did you work through that, especially when you had experienced such a profound loss? And the real risk of love is that it can get taken away.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. I have 2 children today. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they were both born after losses. And I have never known pregnancy to be anything but truly a daily terror. It's just a true confrontation of mortality from waking to sleeping. And I don't wish that on anyone. I certainly never saw it for myself at the beginning of this journey, but I found it truly terrifying. And I had to find solid anchors for myself, or I wouldn't have been able to function. And I think a few of the anchors I found are, simple yet profound. And again, this is for any kind of unknowing because we all live in unknowing. This is not an isolated experience. But the first thing that really helped me was just staying grounded in the present. One of my pregnancy books had a line, kind of a mantra for today, and it just said simply, "Today I am pregnant." And I don't know what tomorrow is. I don't know about next week. I don't know. But right now, I have whole body, whole person access to the only time I have whole person access to right now. This is where I am. And letting that be enough for today. And there's a way to expand that into whatever your own love against risk scenario is. It's just like, today I have what I need. Today I'm safe. Today I am cared for. And it's daily, but I think it shapes us. And I wouldn't say this is a practice, but maybe something to stay close to is I was really interested to learn. There have been some studies, and you may be in the deep on these, but there have been some interesting studies that show people who are in secure relationships where they're loved unconditionally, they're supported unconditionally, it's healthy, stable support. They are more emboldened to take risks. And I found that certainly personally in my marriage and family relationships. And I think leaning on the support from those secure relationships can give us what we need to face the unknown. And that can be the people in our lives. And I also think that, in my case of really kind of stepping away from the Christmas season in the wake of my loss, again, that was valid and not without reason. But I had to do my own work to mend what I knew was a secure relationship with the God of Advent. I knew that cognitively, but I did not feel that emotionally. And I had to do my own work to restore that trust and sort of come back into the remembrance that trust is earned so that I could experience the benefits of, okay, I've got a solid anchor. I can take some risks. Like, I have a widened capacity for the unknowns because I know that where it matters most, I am held and seen and supported.
This is really powerful, and I want to make sure the listener is grasping what you're saying. There's a lot in this. So first and foremost, that I've got to be anchored in the present moment. It's that today, this is what is true, which is such a powerful way to live life, but is almost essential when you're risking, to your point, right? When you're risking. But I also heard you talk about loving anchors. And I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, Stephanie. You had the support of your husband. There are loving anchors in our lives, loving family members. But then you went to God. And I think I heard you saying that was a little bit risky too.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Is this a loving anchor in this?
Right. Right.
Right? So when you're back in that position now of maybe taking a risk to go through another pregnancy, you had to really rework that with God. God wasn't necessarily intuitively that safe, loving anchor. I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, but am I?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I don't think for a second that God is threatened by that sense that maybe there's some trust that needs restored. That's the work of relationships. I don't think God is scared by that. I don't think God is put off by that. To the contrary, you know, I wonder if maybe God sees that as an invitation to get more authentically connected and for a more authentic trust. So there's something powerful there. And, without giving too much away, but I do just want to preview a big, as it relates to Advent and, my sense of being very unseen by this season. I had to re envision that story for myself. And I found a lot of when things started to turn for me, and I can tell you when that was. Things started to turn for me as I revisited that narrative and I realized that upon deeper reading, this is not a one dimensional story of celebration and triumph because the context of the world into which this baby is born was war torn. And not only that, but specific somewhat to my, you know, context, there's the gospels don't cut out this whole other narrative of what's called the massacre of innocents. And that's when Herod, jealous king, goes out and tries to preserve his kingship by preventing this baby from being born. And rather than sideline that narrative, this is part of Advent as much as the birth of Christ is. And in fact, God came through the incarnation because of stories like this, because this should not be. It was so serious that God had to come down himself and enter our narrative and our pain. And that's when it really started to turn for me, that realization that this too is part of the story. And if you are feeling like Christmas and Advent is painful to you, it's not lining up with your experience, the Gospels give a fair hearing also to a story of deep tragedy. And, the Gospels even echo prophetically, the prophets from the Old Testament, Rachel, as part of Israel, they echo her cries through the centuries. And it says, Rachel is crying for her children, for they are no more. And I hear that today, and I had to learn to hear that is your sorrow is sacred to God. And your crying, you are being heard and honored by a God who remembers your grief in every season. You are not alone. You are not unseen. And that's when I, especially at the time, begrudgingly, I will admit, I was like, okay, I'm hearing this. And that felt like a gift in a season that felt like, oh, you're not participating in this. This isn't for you.
In fact, your staying home on Christmas Eve is just as much you participating
Oh, yes.
in that story
Yes.
as
Yes.
anybody else. It doesn't always feel that way. And I hear you. It feels like we're the ones stepping away when in fact, oh no. But it took a while. I hear what you're saying to recalibrate in your own body that not just slapping on some sort of cognitive, but really allowing your embodied wisdom to understand, no, this too is part of the story. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And it is deeply seen by God, and God is grieving in Rachel's tears and in
Yes.
yours.
Yes. We long for a life that is full of connection with God, ourselves, and others. Yet we've become programmed to seek peace, contentment, and even happiness from our phones. Deep down, we know this isn't how we were created to live. As endless scrolling leaves us feeling anxious, depressed, distracted, and alone, we realize our true needs can't be met by turning to social media. If you feel like your digital life could use a reset, you're not alone. In her brand new book, Social Media Reset, author and life coach Allie Marie Smith invites you to pause for 30 days and seek restoration in your mind, heart, body, and soul. Whether you're looking to find true connection, rediscover your passions, or embrace a new way of life that brings you joy, Social Media Reset will help you reconnect with what truly matters and guide you toward a purposeful life you love. Social Media Reset by Allie Marie Smith is now available wherever books are sold.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
You've said this, Stephanie, but I really want to underscore it because it comes out of your lived experience. What was surprising to you as you recalibrated not only that season of Advent, but you also kind of began to recalibrate to the different seasons of the church calendar? What surprised you about God?
Yeah. I think it's been an unfolding, but I'll tell you this. I'm looking at it right now. Over my desk, I have an ancient Celtic symbol, and oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. I think it's a triquetra, and it's basically a sort of Trinitarian image. There's three interlinking arches, and then in the middle, there's a center that they create. And my sisters gave this to me. It's like a stained glass kind of hanging. And my sisters gave this to me after my first loss. And I, at the time, hung it up over the kitchen sink and just started looking at it. And over time, I've really started to see the center of this piece as the place where we are held by God. And I think about this beautiful verse in Colossians that says, "In God, all things hold together." And I think what for me has emerged through much contemplation on where is God meeting me in this healing process, and what has really emerged for me is new and kind of renewed images of God, both as mother and midwife. And I started to think of that verse in Colossians as "in God all things hold together." And I started to think of it as, in this center, this space that I'm visualizing in my triquetra, we are held together. And I think about the imagery of a woman in pregnancy. We talk about she's carrying, and she's carrying life, and she's carrying mystery. And that is very kindred language to the salvation metaphor, actually, that Jesus speaks of when he's talking to Nicodemus. And Nicodemus asks, "What do I need to do to enter the kingdom?" And Jesus says, "You need to be born again." And at a very face value reading, who is doing that birthing? Who is doing the divine work of that birthing? It's God. And that might feel unfamiliar to some Christian practice, and it might even feel a little, can we say that? Can we do that? But I think if you take a close look, you'll find so many images and language in scripture that is really rich with these. And, it's all metaphor, right? Even God as Father, that's a metaphor just as much as any of this is. But metaphor is helpful. That's how we can understand the abstract. And I think metaphor becomes for us a threshold to new understanding. And that's what it was for me. I thought, I am held, I am carried, and the promise and the presence in that is meaningful to me.
That's powerful. And that is, sometimes I think about, even when you were saying whether you were working it out, that holding is. It is. And I think about, as you're saying, it's like when we think about the ideal, not that this is everybody's experience, but the ideal of mother love, right? Of it's a love that just holds through
Yes.
everything.
So I have a master's in theology, and I actually did my capstone thesis on images of God for women and what kind of a male savior means for women. And so I've done these studies, and there's one that really interests me. There's a scholar named Phyllis Tribble, and she has done a study of the Hebrew word for womb, and the Hebrew word for womb and mercy share the same root. They're very close etymologically. And there's even a dynamic to this word there's so much, to be said about God's mercy and loving kindness. I think that's the same word here, but she calls it kind of one and the same. This is God's womb love. It's a mercy that is all encompassing and holds it all. This is a love that holds space for us all, that holds our pain. And there's even a dynamic in the linguistic study that talks about this mercy, this womb love that's trembling for the beloved. Like, this is a very active love, a very, dynamic, ever present stance toward us. And I think that's really beautiful. And, for all of the wishful thinking promises that won't hold up, of which there are many, this is not one of them.
I wrote down this quote. It's toward the end of the book. You do end up giving birth to your first baby girl, Quinn. And here's this quote. I just thought it was stunning. And it's similar to what you're describing right now. You're describing your new baby girl, and you say, surely her life, surely every life will hold a great shimmering spectrum of everything. Resurrection mornings and dark nights of the soul, sweeping pandemics and paper cut griefs, great loves, sucker punch losses, and disorienting in betweens. For all my burning goodwill, as a mother, you're saying, I can't promise my daughter safe passage, but I can promise her presence in any passage. I mean, that's it. That's incredible.
Yeah, I was really on a mission with this book to shake the trees free of any kind of promise in the face of pain that wouldn't actually test true. And this is what it came down to. You just found the very bottom of the funnel. This is it. It's presence.
What's amazing about that, and again, this is the true gospel of death, resurrection, and ascension. That is the Paschal mystery, right? If you go to a liturgical church, right, every Sunday, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. This is the ongoing pattern of all of our lives. And you're saying it so beautifully, because this isn't a superficial Band-Aid. This is oh my gosh, through my own experience of this incredible pain, I've come to a deeper understanding of what withness or presence is. And now I will have more of that to offer to this little girl, which is really what she needs. And there are just no words to describe this, but that comes pretty close. That's really beautiful, Stephanie. That's just a gorgeous naming.
Thank you. I have a brief piece too that I'd like to tag onto that. I had a couple scares during my pregnancy with my daughter. And there was a moment when my doctor, just a routine checkup, and, it was like third trimester, everything's looking good. And my doctor said, you're great, but you're out of the woods now. And I sort of laughed bitterly to myself, thinking, are we ever? My kids are very earthside. Are we out of the woods? I don't know. There's still so many unknowns. So I wrote this in response to that. There are so many woods. Life is an outright wilderness of them, dividing up the furniture with the one you thought would be your forever, gritting your teeth through the toxic work environment because you need the health insurance, grappling with the crushing weight of helplessness as the news cycle breaks your heart again and again. While it would be far preferable to live our lives where we can see the sun above the tree line, where we can feel its warmth on our skin, and the safety of some gold clearing, we know the forest will always be part of the landscape. We may not ever be out of the woods altogether, but we can live our lives in communion. We can live sealed as God's own forever. The I am with us in any wilderness. What's more, I believe we are meant to.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing your story, not only with us today, but through this beautiful book. It's called Even After Everything, the spiritual practice of knowing the risks and loving anyway. And I just so appreciate you're a writer's writer. It's a beautiful book, but you're taking that hard-earned wisdom and bringing it to folks so they don't feel alone in it. And I just want to thank you not only for your time today, but for doing that hard work.
And I want to toast the courage of all the listeners to this conversation. Whatever unknowns you're facing, whatever risks you're taking on, that makes you one of the brave ones, and that matters. And you are radically accompanied, which is a quote from Wendy Wright, in all of that.
That's beautiful. Thanks so much for just giving us your time, and just so grateful for you.
Thank you, Allison. So good to be with you.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode, and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.